Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the different things around SMU and how they're a very dangerous team going into the next 5 or 10 years of college football because they got plenty of money at their disposal. But it'll definitely be a very interesting thing to watch. But let's jump into segment 4 here and let's get into the big time 4 week stretches for these contenders. Whether it's, 4 games that they absolutely have to win, 4 games that they got to split, 4 games that they got to go 3-1, whatever have you. You tend to find that in these championship runs, there's a week, 3 week, 4 week, 5 week, what have you. There's a stretch in that season where that team becomes a real time championship contender. Whether it's, they went from a team that could be dangerous to a team that is really dangerous, or we're a team that we expected to be really good, but just reaffirm that in dominating fashion. It's definitely a lot of things to unpack there, and I think it's one of those things that you start to see more and more as you watch more college football. But let's jump in and let's start with Ohio State. And I think it starts with Iowa coming to town on October 5th, and I think that's going to be absolutely huge for this program. That's a game where the last couple of years it really hasn't been an issue for Ohio State. The last, number of years it has not been an issue for Ohio State, but it shouldn't be an issue this year. But it's definitely one that if they walk in and don't necessarily roll and don't necessarily play the football that we're expecting of them, we can definitely give a little bit of a side eye and worry a little bit about this offense. I understand that Iowa's going to have a fantastic defense, but there should be at least ability to make some plays and win this game by 21, 24 points at least. So that's definitely kind of the start of this stretch. Then you got Oregon. You got a huge game on October 12th, which is the best week of football in the entire season. But at Oregon is going to be absolutely huge, and it's going to be one of those games where you figure out, are you the team that's going to be the team to beat in the Big Ten this upcoming year? I think it would be one of those where you can really send a message to Oregon and say, this is still our conference. We're still going to run things over here. Us and Michigan are still the teams to beat, and you're going to have to go through us if you want a title. And we'll get into Oregon and Michigan a little bit later, but this one's going to be a huge one just for perception of Ohio State. Going into Oregon and getting that win and saying, we're still the top dog around here, you're not able to just walk in and beat us right away, is going to be huge for this team going forward and will be huge for how they're treated going forward. And then you have Nebraska on October 26th after a bye, and I think that one's really, really interesting. This is enough time for Nebraska to really get rolling offensively and Dylan Raiola to maybe kick off some of the cobwebs of that freshman season, and maybe they'll be able to roll over them. And frankly, Jim Knowles has been really, really good at coaching those defenses. So a freshman looking, not too great against a big-time defense like that wouldn't be overly surprising to me by any means. But I do think this is a game where, kind of like that Iowa one, where if they run into issues with this team, if they allow some plays, if they allow some plays defensively or offensively, if they don't play to that level, then you definitely have some worries about Ohio State going into the backstretch of the season, and then they go to Penn State, and that's obviously a game where, again, they've absolutely controlled that one for the last little bit, but they definitely need to be ready to go on that Saturday, because I think this is a Penn State team, especially on that offensive side of the ball, that is going to really get rolling throughout the year. I think Andy Kotelnicki and Drew Aller is not necessarily going to work right away, but it's definitely one that absolutely will develop throughout the season and could cause you problems down the stretch. So I think this is a game where Ohio State should win it. Ohio State should absolutely walk in and win this game, but there's a lot of variables going into this one, and whenever you play Penn State, it's never going to be an easy one to win. So I think Ohio State's going into that game with a lot of confidence, but there's definitely going to be a little bit of worry. And obviously, this doesn't include the biggest game on the schedule because that's Michigan, and that would dwarf all of these games by a million miles. But at the end of the day, you got to go 3-1 in this stretch. I understand that is a very lofty goal for this team, but when you have Michigan down the road, when you have the Big Ten title possibly and the playoff, you're going to have to give yourself as much wiggle room as possible. So I think 3-1 is absolutely what they should do, and anything below that could be a problem. And then 4-0 should be the expectation, because they've been talking about it at Big Ten Media Days, but this team has one thing on its mind, and it's a national title. And if you can't beat these 4 teams in front of you, then you got a problem going after a national title this year. But let's move on and let's get into Georgia. And I think it starts at Texas on October 19th. This is a huge game. Obviously, Texas, the close second to Bama, doesn't include the big-time game again for this team. But I think this is the stretch where we're really going to figure out a lot about this team, because this is a stretch that they just haven't really seen in past years. You know, going to Texas, having to play Florida, at Ole Miss, and then Tennessee is not necessarily a stretch that Georgia fans have really had to worry about. 2 of those teams have not been on the schedule very often over the last little bit. So I think that Texas game is one where it's kind of like that Ohio State-Oregon game, right? You have to be able to send the message and say, we're the top dog around here. You're not going to roll in and beat us, even if we are playing on your field. So that's going to be kind of a message-sending game for Georgia if they can pull that one off. I think that Florida game is really, really interesting. Obviously, Kirby has taken care of that one pretty much every single year since he's shown up, but this one's going to be really, really interesting because this is a team that could get things going throughout the year, or they could be falling on their face. So it could be that Georgia rolls into that game and should be winning by 28 points. It could be that they're going into a dogfight and just winning a game by 1 point would be good enough. So that'll be a really interesting game, and we really won't know the impact of it until it comes around, but definitely will be a huge one to watch. And then you have at Ole Miss on November 9th, and that's one that might just be the one of this upcoming season. I understand Bama has all of the attention and definitely should, but I think that Ole Miss game is where you can either have UGA, lose their grip on the SEC, or absolutely ruin everyone else's hope and take over the SEC once again. So I think that could be the moment where they just might win the SEC that Saturday and totally move on from the rest of the league. And then you have Tennessee coming to Athens, and this one's going to have so much juice. I can't remember a game, a Georgia-Tennessee game in particular, that going into the year had as much energy as the one this year is going to have. And I know that 2022 game was crazy, but coming into the year, we didn't necessarily expect what Tennessee had in store for us. So definitely it's going to be a really interesting game, and I think it's going to be one of those that is going to be a battle from start to finish. Whether it's, UGA coming out on top by 7 or 14, or, suffocating them the way they did in 2022, I don't know. But at the end of the day, I think this could be a game between 2 top 10 teams in the country, and if it's that, then you're going to have one of the best atmospheres you've seen in quite some time. I can almost promise you that. But this is a stretch that, as we talked about, UGA just hasn't had to deal with in previous years, and if they can go undefeated here, then this team is going to be really hard to beat. I can just promise you that. And if they go 3-1 or maybe even 2-2 here, then it might be a little bit of worry about Georgia even making the playoff this upcoming year. But it'll be really interesting to watch that unfold. Let's move on to Texas here, and I don't include the Georgia game in this stretch, and I know that's a little bit crazy, but I just think the back end of this schedule is going to be huge for Texas. It's going to be the culmination of what could be a season, what could be a not so good season. That UGA and Michigan game are going to be huge to kind of decide how important these games are, obviously, but the Florida one kicking it off on November 9th is one that I think Texas just needs to roll in. You have a team rolling in that might be reeling at this point, might have a new coach at this point, possibly, hopefully not, in my opinion, but at the end of the day, that's definitely a real possibility, and if you have that, you have to roll in this game. You have to be able to assert your dominance over a team that could just be on really uneven footing at that point. So I think that's a game that they likely should take care of and really need to. And then they go to Arkansas, and that's one that's kind of a sore spot for a lot of Texas fans, because I think every single Texas fan remembers in 2021 when they went up to Fayetteville and everyone on the team just looked straight up intimidated. They looked like they couldn't handle the atmosphere that they were walking into, and they're not walking into just one Fayetteville this upcoming year. They're walking into about 8 of them. So they're going to have to deal with that pretty much every week, and we'll figure out early on how they can deal with those atmospheres. But overall, it's definitely going to be really interesting to kind of see how all of this unfolds, and definitely going to be interesting to see if there's a place where they can get tripped up, this might be the spot, and if it is, then Texas might not be the team that we expect them to be this upcoming year. And then you have Kentucky kind of in the Florida camp. I think this is a little bit more of a dangerous team, and one that at this point of the year could have things really rolling and could be a really dangerous team with Brock Vandagriff at quarterback. But overall, you really shouldn't be playing with your food in this game. I understand that Kentucky's a really, really good team, but if you're a Texas team that is rolling in, whether you have 2 losses or 1 loss rolling into this game, you got to be ready to roll, and you absolutely have to be able to win this game by, let's say, 10, 14 points. It doesn't necessarily have to be overly pretty, but you absolutely have to be able to take care of business. There's no two ways about that. And then at A&M. And frankly, it's the game of the season for Texas. I understand you have Michigan, you have OU, you have Georgia. I think this is the one that frankly, Texas fans want to win the most, and some of these players want to win the most, and obviously there will be different answers across that entire fan base, but I think this is one of those games that it's been building up for just so long, and you have to be able to walk into that atmosphere and handle it, and it's going to show, Fayetteville and, going into Ann Arbor and all of these other places that they have to go to throughout the year will show if they can kind of handle it, but this is going to be one that might just be on a totally different level, and it'll be really, really interesting to watch all of that. But I think if they have 1 loss rolling into this game, you got to go 4-0 or 3-1 in this stretch. If you have no losses, 3-1 or even 2-2 would do. But overall, I think if this is a Texas team that is going to be dangerous this upcoming year, and they're going to be a national title contender, they should be going 4-0. I understand there is tough atmospheres in there. I understand there are teams that are a little bit more physical than they've had to deal with in the past. But overall, if this is going to be a national title contender, these are 4 games that they should win and just continue rolling into an SEC title game in their first year. So that'll be really interesting to watch. And then finally, the last team here is Oregon, and definitely one that is really interesting going into this year. You have at Michigan on November 2nd that I think is going to be fascinating to unpack, because that's another game where Michigan can send the message that, you're the new kid on the block. We're not going to let you come in and absolutely dominate us year one. And then on the other side, Oregon come in and say, nah, that's exactly what we're going to do. So it'll be really interesting to watch that kind of unfold from a physicality perspective and just from a energy perspective on the Oregon side of things. And then you go to you have Maryland come to you, excuse me. This one will be really interesting. I think Mike Locksley is one of those guys that always has something up his sleeve, always has a game where he calls an absolute masterclass, and this could be that. I understand this is definitely one of the longer shots in this video, but overall, I definitely think this is one of those that could get really sketchy, and if it does, then Oregon could have some troubles going into the last couple of weeks of the season, because they go to Wisconsin right after that, and I think it's one of those games that is really fascinating for a number of reasons, because I think Wisconsin could be rolling by that point. I don't necessarily think it's going to be the prettiest season to start for Wisconsin, and in the big-time games, I don't necessarily think they're going to come out on top, including this one, but overall, they could be a more dangerous team right now than they are in September, and they are in October, so I think they have an ability to at least make this a dangerous game, and one that, if they're looking forward to that Washington game that I'll get to here in a second, you could get into a little bit of trouble, but you do have a bye before you get into that Washington game, and frankly, I think they want to win this one the most. I understand the Ohio State game, the Michigan game, but kind of in the same vein of Texas and A&M, well, a different kind of argument, but you have a team that beat you twice last year. You have a team that kept you out of the playoff. You have a team that kept you from doing all the things that you wanted to do a year ago, and you really want to beat them, and you expect to beat them this upcoming year with a lot of the changes at Washington, but I think that's one that if they finish an awesome year in the Big Ten and go to a Big Ten title while beating Washington in the process, I don't think you could write it better if you were an Oregon fan. So that's going to be really fascinating to watch, but overall, there always tends to be a stretch of 3-4 games where a team turns from a team that you think can win a title to a team that absolutely can, or a team that is the on-odds favorite to win a title. And it's really interesting to watch those unfold, but we'll absolutely unpack some more throughout the week here and definitely get into some more details around all the other contenders and where they could possibly become really dangerous in 2024. But let's take our final break here. When we come back, we're going to get into hot takes for the contenders in the ACC this time around. We've gotten through the Big 12, which had about 1 million contenders, but the ACC is a little bit more straightforward, so we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us.